A delight and an honor to be here with you all this morning. Welcome to a summer service of the First Parish in Lincoln. We are usually not here together, or usually not together during the summer, but in light of everything that's going on, we've decided to meet weekly throughout the summer here on Zoom, and we are so glad that you are here with us today to worship together, to comfort one another, to encourage one another, and I look forward to having this service together with you all. Usually at this time we have announcements. I don't know of any announcements at the moment, so you are welcome if there is something going on in the life of the church that you think people should be aware of. You are welcome, and you are invited to write it in the chat box. You're also invited during this time to type out your prayers in the chat box, and they will be read later on in the service. Please remember to remain muted throughout the service so that we can not have any background noise that disrupts the video and audio of the service. But you are welcome in your homes to participate, to sing out, to shout amen. You know, I'm Pentecostal, so I like some participation. Welcome, and we are so grateful. We're so glad that you're here with us. So at this time, let's deepen into worship with our opening words, followed just a moment later by our opening hymn. I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open, and the first voice, which I had heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this."
Please join me, if you wish, in our covenant. In the love of truth and in the spirit of Jesus, we unite for the worship of God and the service of all. We come now to the time in our service that we set aside for silent and spoken prayer. To prepare, we will listen to an instrumental of Peace Like a River. We lift up these prayers from members and friends. A prayer of thanksgiving for all those who have stepped up once again to support the food pantry. Bless you. May our courage be sustained for however long it takes. A prayer of remembrance, always, for the courageous spirit and life of John Lewis. Prayers for my childhood friend June, who lost her husband this week. Great Holy One, in this in-between time of our stunning and wounded world, help us understand the value of waiting. Not passive, but simmering with new growth and creativity. That waiting is what it takes for something new to be born. Bless this time of waiting and of passage as we travel from our past to our future. Bless our restlessness, our attempts at patience. May its gifts be deeper understanding. If we have regrets, dear Lord, help us see them as gifts that can lead us to better choices. This time between is for new ideas to have room to grow. May those roots grow deep and strong, Great Spirit, so their branches reach around the world and sing of a world redeemed. May it be so. We appreciate your generosity so very much at this time. Please donate online at fpllincoln.org or mail us a check.
Our second reading this morning, taken from Revelation 21 and 22, paraphrase I adapted. Then I saw a newly ordered heaven and earth, for the order of the first heaven and the first earth had been undone, and the tumultuous waves of injustice were no longer crashing down on the people. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her lover. A union of what is and what could be was coming. And I heard a loud voice from all the foundations of reality saying, "See, the home of God is among the people. She's been with them all along, unfolding her heavenly dwelling throughout all creation. They will know her fully, and God will be with them always and wipe away every tear from their eyes. Injustice will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain be no more. For the first order of things has been undone. And the oneness who is at the ground of all being said, 'See, I'm making all things new.' Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, bright as a crystal, flowing from the heart of God through the middle of the street of the city. On either side of the river is the tree of life, with its 12 kinds of fruit, producing fruit each month, and the leaves of the tree are for the healing of the nations. Nothing oppressive will be found there anymore, but the heart of God will flow like the river through the city, and the people will be carried on by its currents of peace. They will see divine glory, both in the new city and in themselves." And the angel said to me, "These words are trustworthy and true. For the God of the spirits of the prophets has sent messengers to show the people what must soon take place. See, this is all coming soon. Blessed is the one who keeps and acts on the words of the prophecy of this book." I lived in constant fear of being left behind as a child. Not a "what if my parents leave me at the grocery store or forget to pick me up from school" kind of left behind. I mean a fear of being left behind on earth, destined for tribulation, while my parents and all other true Christians were raptured safely to heaven. On more than one occasion when I was growing up, I would wake up to a seemingly empty house. I would race from room to room trying to find my parents, who inevitably were just getting something from the basement or were out in the garden. But for those few minutes of uncertainty, I was terrified that the end of the world had come and I had missed the train out of here. I grew up in a very end times oriented, apocalypse happy faith tradition. It taught me that any minute Jesus was going to come back to rapture all the Christians up to heaven, at which point the book of Revelation would come to life here on earth, complete with horsemen, human eating locusts, 7-headed beasts, and so on. I know that the trauma and the abuse inflicted from this ancient biblical text of Revelation is real. It's been used to justify everything from patriarchy and indifference to the climate crisis to a doctrine of eternal torture in hell and Christian nationalism. I understand for many this is not a book that you have any interest in exploring. But for me, the events of the past several months have repeatedly called me back to it, a book that, after all my deconstruction, I still hold sacred somehow. It still holds truths for me that give me a spiritually constructive and justice-oriented lens through which I can see the world. So this morning, I invite you to pick up this tragically misunderstood book with me and see how it might help to give some language to what we are collectively experiencing in this historic moment. Much of the misuse of Revelation comes from a misunderstanding of who the ancient readers were. The book of Revelation is actually a letter written to scattered Christian communities living under Roman imperialism. The book opens by addressing 7 such communities or churches made up of refugees that had fled violence from their homeland. An anti-imperialist resistance movement in Palestine had just been squashed by the Romans in 70 CE. The temple in Jerusalem, the one that had been rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, had been utterly destroyed yet again, along with their ability to remain safely on their own land. Once again, the Jewish people, of which the New Jesus movement was still a part, had to adapt their faith in light of not having their sanctuary, their spiritual home, or any of their historic rituals that had grounded their community. In search of a safe new home, these Middle Eastern refugees found themselves in a land that was hostile toward their faith and ruled by an oppressive dictator with a god complex. The dominant faith of the Roman Empire was the Imperial Cult, which centered on the worship of the emperor. Being a good and faithful citizen of Rome meant declaring Caesar as Lord and offering religious sacrifices in his name. Christians were unwilling to do so, and so they were considered traitors to Rome, faced imprisonment or even state-sponsored murder for not falling in line. Local governmental officials looking to gain favor with the emperor would ramp up persecutions in their districts in an effort to root out any dissent. Meanwhile, corruption and political infighting plagued the capital, and natural disasters plagued the empire. The earth quaked, Rome burned, Vesuvius erupted, the economy collapsed, famine spread. One thing after another. Must have felt like the end of the world. In the midst of all of this, a man named John wrote an apocalypse. First word of the book, and it's the first opportunity for modern readers to misunderstand what's going on. We hear the word apocalypse and we imagine world-ending catastrophes like the book will go on to describe. But this word, literally in Greek, uncovering or unveiling, is not meant to describe the events themselves, but what those events do. It's why the book is named Revelation. Through these earth-shattering events, something is being revealed. And as we see in the book of Revelation and in our current moment, an apocalypse is the unveiling of what is. The text describes a series of prophetic visions that expose patterns at work in John's world that are causing destruction and oppression. These visions are not predictive. It doesn't have to be this way. They're actually a visionary critique of what already is, as theologian Catherine Keller argues. In a world in which outright critiquing the empire could get you killed, John chose a subversive literary medium through which to speak truth to power. It's coded resistance literature designed to comfort and encourage an oppressed people living in constant fear for their lives. Looking at the chaos of his time, John weaves together visions that unveil the true values of his time. Using poetic language to describe the destruction of Rome, codenamed Babylon, he accuses the kings and merchants of valuing their loss of comfort over the impact these tragedies have on human lives. He says, "And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, Rome, since no one buys their cargo anymore. Cargo of gold, silver, jewels and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk and scarlet, all kinds of scented wood, all articles of ivory, all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, choice flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, slaves, and human lives." When the house is on fire, what do you rush to save? Restaurants and bars, or our children and our elders? Systems that benefit the few or those who are most vulnerable? Property and statues or Black lives? In addition to unveiling the values of Rome, John's apocalypse unveils the interwovenness of the oppressions and tragedies that have unfolded. In chapter 6, we find the famous 4 Horsemen passage. John writes, I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow. A crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another. He was given a great sword. I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3/4 barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. The rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth. 4 horsemen. Power-hungry authoritarian conquest. War. Economic exploitation. Pestilence. In John's vision, these evils and tragedies are all intertwined. Imagine a world with a system that produces enormous wealth gaps between those doing essential work and those who reap the benefits of that work. Now imagine if those wealth gaps largely followed racial lines because of a history of chattel slavery, black codes, Jim Crow, redlining, a war on drugs, and so on. Imagine a city where there are more luxury apartments owned by the rich than there are unhoused people, and yet the housing crisis is allowed to continue. A world increasingly cut off from the land and sources of good food, with growing food deserts and increasing pollution, causing respiratory disease in low-income communities. Just imagine. How might the sudden spread of a powerful pestilence impact different communities within that world? What might that pestilence reveal about what was already wrong and how all of these problems intersect with one another? Being confronted and bearing witness to these truths can be overwhelming and painful. We may want to close the book at this point and say, well, that's enough of that. I can't bear to read anymore. But as any good psychoanalyst or apocalyptic author knows, things have to be unveiled and exposed before they can be dealt with. John doesn't leave us to surrender to our hopelessness because an apocalypse moves us through the unveiling of what is, the unveiling of what could be. We heard from our second reading, the fall of Babylon opens the opportunity for a new city to be reconstructed from the ashes. The visionary critique is followed by a new imagination that Keller calls a vision of a rehydrated world of social justice and environmental health, a vision of comfort for all who suffer unfairly. A world where the tears are wiped from our eyes, where all are nourished, have access to justly stewarded land, and health and equality and hope. A world founded on a truth whose time has come. As Keller goes on to say, I do not read here any guarantee, just an undying outer edge of the prophetic hope. It is a hope in the dark, and it works to twist catastrophe into catalyst. Our current moment has unveiled our values and the intersecting injustices that have lived for generations, but it has also unveiled what is possible. It has shown us definitively that entire societies can adopt new policies and new behaviors almost overnight. This crisis has unveiled that we are capable of change. We can do something about the climate crisis and about racial injustice if we have the conviction and the persistence to do so. We can do big things. It doesn't have to be this way. But as Angela Davis has said, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And you have to do it all the time. Just as this crisis has unveiled the interwovenness of our pain, it has also shown us the power of our interwoven struggles for justice. Collaboration and solidarity are possible across racial, economic, gender, and religious divides. We can and we must work together because that which impacts you also impacts me. The myth of personal independence has once again been exposed by the reality of our collective interdependence. We need each other. And so I am not free until everyone is free. And this is the power of applying an apocalyptic metaphorical lens to the unfolding of events. It prompts us to ask what truths are being uncovered by these shocking and tragic circumstances. It's an invitation to take a peek behind the curtain, to get a glimpse at what's always been there, but what we have until now been unable or unwilling to perceive. And it prompts us to ask with Martin Luther King, with the oppressed of this ancient text and the oppressed of today, how long? How long? Apocalyptic events have unfolded in such a way that we cannot take refuge in our normal daily rhythms. All we have is the urgent now. How many of us have said something like, time has no meaning anymore over the last 4 months? This is the same temporally disoriented sentiment reflected in apocalyptic phrases like, the time is near, time is short, which in the original Greek means the time of possibility is contracted. How long? Not long. At least if we stay vigilant, if we stay ready to make the most of the possibilities that have been unveiled. To read ancient or contemporary events through the lens of apocalypse is not to suggest that these events are predetermined or are a closed future that is coming to a chronological close. It is an invitation to recognize the possibilities and the urgency of the moment in which we find ourselves. It's Martin Luther King saying, I've been to the mountaintop and I've seen the promised land. It's an open door saying, come up here and I will show you what must take place after this. What must take place after this? And are we ready to do the work that will bring it to pass? May it be so.
Please join me, if you would, in saying our call to ministry. We go forth from the worship of God to be faithful to the vision of Jesus, to affirm each person's dignity, and to cherish the living earth.
And may you go forth with renewed commitment, conviction, persistence, the meeting of what is and what could be. May grace and peace go with you now and forever. Amen.